I'd like to deal with the topic, what is closed communion? Regarding the Lord's table or communion, there are two distinctive and very different positions regarding who are allowed to partake. We identify the two positions by the terms open communion versus closed communion. Those holding the open communion position believe and practice that all professing believers have a right to come to the Lord's table. When the Lord's table is served, while some general instructions are given, it's usually left to the discretion of the individual whether or not they partake. This is the position of most churches today. Those who visit a church practicing closed communion are often offended at the suggestion that they are not welcome to partake. They feel they are being denied their God-given right to share in the Lord's table. Those holding to the closed communion position fence the table or restrict those who may partake. Although there are some differences in how the ordinance is administered regarding who are allowed to partake, there's a general consensus that we are to know those with whom we share communion. When we join them at the table, we are testifying to our shared union with Christ. This shared fellowship is not possible when strangers come to the table. The question is it proper to place restrictions upon who can partake of communion? Well, first of all, we need to remember that like baptism, the Lord's Supper is an ordinance of the local church, served under the authority of the local church. When a church baptizes an individual, it is saying that it accepts that person as a believer. Likewise, when a local church admits someone to the Lord's Supper, it is saying that it accepts that person as a believer. In both scenarios, there's the implication that the church knows those to whom it is administering the sacrament. In both baptism and the Lord's Supper, there is a restriction placed upon who is able to participate in the ordinance. In 1 Corinthians 5, after giving the church the command to excommunicate an offending member, Paul charges them in verses 9 through 11, "I wrote you in my letter not to associate with immoral people. I did not at all mean with the immoral people of this world, or with the covetous and swindlers or idolaters, for then you would have to go out of the world. But I actually wrote to you not to associate with any so-called brother, if he is an immoral person or covetous or idolater or a reviler or a drunkard or a swindler, not even to eat with such a one." Paul is charging them not to fellowship with those who profess to be Christians, but are immoral in their behavior. The highest display of fellowship for a local church takes place at the Lord's table. Paul says, don't eat with them. There's the clear implication in this passage that we know those with whom we share the Lord's Supper. There's also an important link in this chapter between the excommunication in the first half and the denial of fellowship in the second half. Church discipline is linked to the Lord's table. Discipline is a means of protecting the purity and fellowship of the church. The disciplined member is excommunicated or disfellowshipped. He's barred from sharing in communion. It would make little sense to bar a disciplined member from the Lord's table while allowing strangers of whom we have no knowledge to partake. If there is no fencing of the table, there can be no true fellowship around the table. With open communion, the church is failing to take seriously their duty to protect the purity and fellowship of the church. Neither the Second London Baptist Confession nor the Baptist Faith and Message allow for open communion. In chapter 30 of the London Baptist Confession, it states, "All ignorant and ungodly persons, as they are unfit to enjoy communion with Christ, So they are unworthy of the Lord's table, and cannot, without great sin against him, while they remain such, partake of these holy mysteries, or, listen, be admitted thereunto. In other words, the church is to restrict admittance to the Lord's table. In the Baptist Faith and Message, which is the confessional statement of the Southern Baptist Convention, it states, "The Lord's Supper is a symbolic act of obedience whereby members of the church, through partaking of the bread and fruit of the vine, memorialize the death of the Redeemer and anticipate his second coming." It also states that baptism is a prerequisite to coming to the table. In other words, according to the Baptist Faith and Message, the church is to restrict admittance to those who are baptized members of the church. This means the consistent practice of Baptist churches has been to fence the table to those with whom we are in close fellowship. Open communion does not recognize baptism as prerequisite, or they receive any and all baptisms as legitimate. A paedo-Baptist is allowed to partake. It's left completely up to the individual. Open communion doesn't recognize the importance of church membership, and open communion dismisses the nature and importance of church discipline by opening the invitation to partake of the Lord's table to any and all who are present. Is left up to the individual. And open communion fails to adequately protect those who are unfit from coming and bringing great harm unto themselves. We must reject the claim to openness at the expense of protecting the purity of the local church. So, which view is practiced by Trinity Baptist Church? Well, I'm sure you can tell by the tone of this video, we don't practice open communion. But we also don't practice a strict closed communion where we only allow our members to partake. We practice what I call a semi-closed communion. While we restrict it generally to only our members, we also want to include those with whom we are in close fellowship, those that we know well. These may include those who are currently in our new members class, but it may also include those who have been visiting with us and with whom I've had an opportunity to get acquainted and to hear the testimony of their conversion and their walk with Christ. These we joyfully invite to come to the Lord's table with us, where we can celebrate the atoning sacrifice of our Savior and fellowship together in our union with Him.